Thank you very much, Caroline. Thank you for inviting me along this evening. I think when we were talking about some of these concepts when they first started, it was you who was interviewing me and gave me a chance to say what I really thought about it. We've been having a chat, the speakers this evening, about change and the sort of where we are now, very sort of topical, difficult, challenging issues that we are facing on a daily basis, whether they're societal or cultural or behavioral. And I think some of the answers to these very challenging problems are embedded in industrial strategy and social value. I mean, these are my two passions. I mean, it's not, if you went on a date night and said your two passions are industrial strategy and procurement, it might be a short evening, but I do think that the potential that these two areas can and deliver is enormous, and I don't think we're anywhere near reaching where we can with either of those. I mean, in this particular time, we're looking at policies that are interventionist under a conservative government, one you would not necessarily expect to be introducing something like an industrial strategy, something like a social value policy. The thing about these two areas of policy is what they do require is they require a level of innovation and creativity of how we tender, how we commission, how we plan, how we look forward into the long term rather than current pressures that force us invariably into a very short-termist, headline, media-driven environment. I think one of the things that does interest me is how both these policies will create new business models, and whether those business models are based on shared values or corporate social responsibility or responsible business, they all come down very much to the same thing: how our businesses play a more significant, useful, value-driven role in society. And I think when I remember back to being in the House of Commons and being on the BEIS select committees and looking at businesses like Sports Direct and how some of these things were starting to reach a tipping point. I work at King's now, and to see our undergraduates and graduates, what they're looking for businesses or businesses of the future, is how they work with society. I've been very lucky that in 2016, I stood up in Parliament and I said, I call on the government to create an industrial strategy. And I remember at that time, there was so much more interest in sugar tax. Now, that might be your thing, but it's not changing our lives, it's not changing our communities. And I remember it was one of the few debates where it came to the end of the debate, and the minister didn't even recognize that topic had been brought up. It was so very last generation. I mentioned May 2016 because that was before the referendum, and I still believed whether we had a referendum or not, whether it was a Brexit or no Brexit, we should still have an industrial strategy. We should start to make sure that things like our strategic industries are looked after for the long term, things that are very important for the way this country is led. We went on from a referendum to a new Prime Minister who stood on the steps of Downing Street talking about an industrial strategy, which suddenly was the very popular topical issue that people wanted to follow. And looking at those grand challenges, artificial intelligence, an aging society, the future of mobility, all these things which if we want to be part of a very global, competitive world, we will need to be finding our way in terms of investment in research and development. But the headline of the strategy of the white paper was an economy that works for everyone. Now, depending or indifferent to what your political view is, that an economy should work for everyone. And I think An industrial strategy, or the industrial strategy that we have now, is something that could perhaps begin to start to deliver that. Not least with bodies like the Independent Industrial Strategy Council, which will stop these policies becoming very political. Social value, I was very lucky to be picked out third in a ballot to have a private member's bill. I chose not to have something like call St. George's Day a holiday or whatever else would get me the front page of the Sun the following morning, but try and do something useful. And I feel that social value, whether it's called social responsibility or shared values or whatever, has started to become embedded in the way that our local authorities and our national commissioners look at the way we do business. And how this was delivered was through a cross-party consensus, which again is something that we see less and less these days. I'm now proud to say that social value influences 10% of government spending, national government spending, which is £26 billion, affecting our communities in terms of things like the living wage, helping people with mental health issues, making sure that our young people have secure and sustainable jobs for the future. And following Carillion, social value is becoming more effective and important. We realise that the way we do business has to be done differently. Just touching briefly on local industrial strategies and place. Every region wants to have well-paid jobs, sustainable jobs, and work in nanotechnology. Now, that's not going to be the thing, and things will have to be different for whichever region perhaps you live. But the question is how are these local industrial strategies going to be distinct and different? How are the LEPs going to work with the local authorities? How business is going to work with Whitehall? How academia is going to be involved? How are we going to look at a region's heritage, its skills base, its infrastructure, and its regional networks? And collaboration will be the most important issue. I'm pleased to say that I now direct a new and unique institute at King's College in London. And we've recently been working on a paper which talks about the 6 principles of how we deliver national policy, looking at things like consensus, institutional buy-in. How do we reconnect with the population and develop issues and redevelop issues like trust? How do we build a narrative where we can talk about the issues that are important to ourselves, important to our communities, important to our families? And how do we implement these strategies? We all probably know about the Marshall Plan. Which the plan was good or bad or whatever, but what was brilliant about that plan is the way that it was implemented. And finally, making sure that these issues are scrutinized. Because without scrutiny, without transparency, we have no idea how we're achieving the difference that I think everybody in this room wants to achieve. So my final words is to make sure that we do have support for policies that are interventionists, that are strategic. And we hold back ourselves on making sure that we're not always looking at tomorrow. We're looking at 5 years, 10 years, 15 years ahead. And that will be very, very difficult to achieve, but I think the rewards will be huge. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you.